everyone. We are starting a new project. I want to welcome everybody first. Chandri, welcome. Sergio. I know I don't say it right. You know how I say it when I try to say it right. It's never good. So we'll just go with Sergio. Let's see. Welcome. John, good to see you. Christy V, welcome. Looks like everybody is starting to pop in. I want to make sure that my sound is okay. Let me know if you cannot hear me or if I'm low. Hey Steve, welcome. So glad to see you here. Cassandra, welcome. Today we're going to start on the project that I announced last week where I did the line drawing and my sound is very soft. I have no way to up it. Wait, yes I do. Hold on. Let's see. Let's go over there. Speakers, sounds. Okay, I have all my sound completely up. So you should be able to hear me. Like everything is completely up. Janice, welcome. Peggy, so glad to see you. I think I have everybody. Okay, that should be better. If not, I have no way of, it's pretty low on my audio mixer too. I don't know why. Let me go one more place. Audio. Weird. Okay, I'll have to look into that when off stream, but it's only going into the green. Usually I have it going into the yellow. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, so this project was announced last week and it's going to be a graphite project. I know many of you do not or have not had a lot of experience with graphite. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over what the different grades mean. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background. And then I'm going to tell you how I chose my pencils. And then we'll get into this. Okay, cool, Cassandra. And Janice says sound is low as well. Well, we're going to have to deal with it right now until Tim comes up here and he can mess with it because I want to jump in here. Hopefully it's not too distracting. I will try to speak a little bit louder. And we'll go from there. And Steve can hear me fine. Okay, cool. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go over what the pencil grades mean. Okay, graphite is unique in that you don't have colors. You just use one, basically monotone. But it does come in different grades. This is just a random one that I have. I have tons of different graphites. They come in different grades. This set actually goes from 2H to 8B. I have sets that range from 8H or 9H all the way down to 8B. I have one set that actually goes to 10, but the 10 doesn't matter because it's really not that big of a deal. So what they mean is the H stands for hard and the B stands for black. Okay, so a number 2 pencil is typically an HB pencil, thereabouts. There is no industry standard for the mixture, like an HB or 2B, say in the Raphine, which this is what this is, may be slightly different than the H or the HB or the 2B in, say, a Derwent or a Faber-Castell or something along those lines. That one should go there. So there's no industry standard. Not all 8Bs are the same. Not all 2Bs are the same. You have to find what pencil set you like. The good thing about graphite is even the cheaper pencils until you really get into working with graphite and how they're used. Uh, you it's not a huge deal. It's not like working with colored pencils where you have to worry about the pigments that are in there and all of that. So basically, your 2H or your H pencils are lighter. So the higher the number, the lighter it is. And then when you go to B, the higher the number, the darker it is. So an 8H pencil is going to be way lighter, and you're going to get hardly any graphite, and you're going to get hardly any movement from that graphite when you do get it down. Then you would say a 2H. Okay? So the reason for this is if you do a swatch of the pencils that you have, then you will see that with the lightest pressure, okay, the very lightest pressure, then like this is a 2H. So this is a medium to about a medium pressure down to a very light pressure. If you do this with all your pencils, you're going to see where the differences come into play. Okay, this is a very light. I didn't even really do much, but this is just normal pressure here. You can see how light the 2H is versus the 8B, right? So that's kind of how you use your pencils. So you kind of judge what pencil you want to use upon how dark you want to go. You want to try to maintain as little pressure as possible, but get your darkest values because you don't want to ruin the tooth of the paper. The harder you press and the darker you go, the more shine you will get as well. This is why you see a lot of artists use charcoal for your darks, and sometimes colored pencil for the darks. I just basically use graphite because I'm perfectly happy with graphite. The shine doesn't really bother me. I know that's part of graphite, so for me, it's kind of just something that I like about graphite. Some people don't like it. I don't mind it. Okay, so how I chose my pencils. Typically, I go with one brand when I'm working with pencils. I usually don't mix the brands. For this one, I did mix the brands because there were certain things that I wanted to happen. And since I was limited to the pencils that I was using, I had to decide which ones I wanted to go with. I usually default to the Derwent graphic pencils, which are these here. And the problem with the Derwents is that some of them have like little nuggets. As you work in it, some of them have nuggets. You'll also find cheaper pencils also have nuggets in them. So you kind of have to scratch them off on a piece of paper until you get rid of those nuggets, and then you can continue on with your work. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but it is what it is. And if you like the pencil, then you kind of have to work with it. So Derwent is usually my go-to when I just deal with the little nugget things. I don't like it, but what can I do? But for this one, what I did is I tried a few things to see, number one, the techniques I wanted to use. I kind of did like a wet graphite. There's water-soluble graphite, so I do have one water-soluble graphite that I am using. And then I tried my different pencils that I wanted to try and see which ones would take the least amount of erasing if I wanted to erase it, but would also erase as much as I wanted, because some will actually stay on the paper more, even if it's the same grade. So that is kind of how I went with that. I was playing around a little bit with the water soluble, and you can see you can get really light effects, which if you look at the reference, we have a lot of light effects. No, you don't have to have water soluble graphite, don't worry. I'm going to show you how to do different techniques getting essentially the same look. But if you have water soluble graphite, you can definitely use it. If you're using the Strathmore sketch paper and you're using water soluble graphite, what happens is if you put a lot of water on it, it's going to buckle. It's kind of hard to see, but it is buckled right here. But if you do it the way I'm going to show you and you want to use it, then it will not buckle because you're not putting hardly any water on at all. Okay? So, the pencils I chose, and I'll tell you why I chose them. The first one is for my 2H. We had to have, before we go on, we had to have a light, a medium light, a medium, a medium dark, and a dark, right? So we're only allowed 5 pencils. You guys can do whatever you feel you want to do. It's kind of a challenge that Sergio and I are doing to see, you know, the different styles. He typically works in a different manner than I do. So this will be interesting to see how his comes out. And mine comes out in, anyway, we'll get into that as we go. So this is a Faber-Castell 2H. I chose a Faber-Castell because Faber-Castell is a little bit harder than Derwent. And I knew I wanted a really light pencil. It will also erase very easily the 2H. And I didn't want to go much higher than the 2H because then I wouldn't get the transitions that I wanted. So I chose the Faber-Castell because it is a little bit harder pencil than the Derwent. For the 2B, I went with the Koh-i-Noor. I know I'm going to say it wrong. How do you feel about using graphite powder? Graphite powder, this is asked by Steve. Graphite powder is fine. One of the reasons we're not using it is because that's typically how Sergio starts his pieces. And so it's a challenge for him not to use it. I don't use it very often. There are times that I do, but there's nothing wrong with graphite powder at all. If, you know, so depends upon what you're used to using. I like to try to go outside the box as well. So that's one of the things that this challenge is for. It's like if you're used to using graphite powder, as you notice, I said don't use graphite powder because for the reasons that I discussed. So if you're used to using graphite powder, I challenge you not to use graphite powder if you're going to do this project, and just try new techniques and go from there. But there's definitely uses for graphite powder. I personally don't use it as often. Okay. So the 2B Toyson Koh-i-Noor Hartmut Toyson. I know I'm not saying it right. Dior, whatever. I chose the 2B because it is kind of dark, but I can also get a lighter value with it. It was between this one and the Derwent, but knowing that the Derwent has those nuggets, especially in the 2B, I went ahead and went with the Koh-i-Noor, so I don't have those problems. The 4B, I went ahead and did the Derwent Graphic 4B. I just really like this pencil. One reason I like Derwents is because I use a lot of blending stumps. And when I use blending stumps, I like my pencil to move across the paper as far as I can. So the Derwent 2B does that for me. And I can get it to move quite a long distance compared to, say, the Faber-Castell. So again, this is a little bit softer than the Faber-Castell, which is why I went with the Derwent Graphic. My 8B, and will always be my 8B, it will always be my darkest value, is the Koh-i-Noor Toyson Dior 1900 8B, because this 8B is darker than any other 8B I have found. Sergio and I were discussing this, and I did a little test of the different 8Bs. I had a couple of different 8Bs and this one, and it was downright the darkest. So it's the one I always use. Yes, it gets shiny when you put a bunch on there, but again, I don't mind it. You can also use charcoal for your darkers. If you do use charcoal, then you need to put that down before you put your pencils, because it will not stick on top of graphite, unless it's a light layer of graphite. The last pencil that I have is the water-soluble HB pencil. Yes, it should technically go here, but since I'm not going to use it very much, probably, then I didn't want to put it in my line of pencils here. It's a little bit thicker pencil. It's a sketching pencil. This is an HB light wash, and I will show you guys how there's different ways you can use it. So I'll show you how to do, this is basically for the faded trees in the back. That's basically what I'm going to use this for. Okay, I'm also going to use, I have a couple of blending stumps, different sizes. And then I also have a Tombow mono eraser. If you don't have a Tombow mono eraser, that's perfectly fine. There's different ways you can do it. You can use a kneaded eraser, which I also have here, and you can put it in these little, mold it into these little shapes and get essentially the same look. If you don't have either one of these, then you can use any eraser you have, something like this or a small one like this, and you could cut it into a point if you need a point. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. My way is not the only way. So experiment and see what works for you. I'm just going to show you how I'm going to do this. I'm also going to use with my water-soluble graphite this water paintbrush. It has a very fine point. And then, but I don't have to, because it's filled with water, I don't have to put a bunch of water on here. So we will go from there. Let's see. Steve says, how does Kimberly General Pencil spread with a stump in comparison to Faber-Castells? I do not know how General Pencils, I do know that General Pencils are a bit softer than Faber-Castells. But I don't particularly care for the General Graphites, but that's not to say that they're junk or anything, right? It's just that I don't prefer to use them. But they are a bit softer, so they will move a little bit farther, I believe, than the Faber-Castells. Some people don't notice a difference. I'm kind of a pencil snob when it comes to graphite in that aspect, so that's kind of where I stand. I might have, I'm looking over there to see what pencils I have. I don't know if I have any General's Graphite. I can, go up and look. Remind me, Steve, and I'll go look before we get off the stream. Okay, so for how long this stream is going to be, I do not know. Okay, the reason I do not know is because it's going to depend upon how long this background takes a little bit. I typically like to work top to bottom, left to right, back to front. This one's going to be a little bit different because there are some darker ones in here. I want to get the dark ones up here first. The reason for that is because if I do use my blending stump, I like to pull from dark areas and make my lighter areas. Okay, so I'll show you how I do that. So if I decide to do that, I want to have some darker value on here so I can pull that darker value from those areas. And then I can always clean up. If I need to add a little bit more darker, I can clean that up. Some people you can work however you want. If you don't want to work in that manner, that's okay. If you want to start with the guy because he's a certain central point, that's fine too. I don't know that we'll get to the guy today. We'll have to see. Also, the next stream, I was talking to my husband, and the next stream, I was going to change it up to different times so other people can join in. However, we were discussing it, and it makes more sense to keep it at the same time, same day for the same project. Okay, so next Sunday, if we do not finish this today, which I doubt we will, next Sunday, 1 o'clock will be the next stream. Okay, I'm not going to change the days. I'm not going to change the time until I change a project. So for this project, it will always be Sundays at 1 p.m. until the project is done. Okay, so everybody that is following doesn't have to worry about doing catching up, and then I'm available for questions as well. Let's see, I was asking because those are the two brands I have when it comes to blending stump for this project. Don't have the Derwent, but it's just really a question of the knowledge of. Yeah, Steve. So there's not a huge difference. I'm very particular, and I notice the differences, and I also notice how different the pencil lays down. Also, depending upon the paper you're using, I also notice the feel of the paper on my pencil. I'm very in tune to that. Some people, it doesn't matter. Okay, it depends upon what you are comfortable with. So either way works. Use what you have. That's the point of this. Use what you have. You saw Anne posted hers, and all she had was an HB pencil at work and printer paper, computer paper. That's all she used. And it turned out beautifully. The point is to just use what you have, use cheap supplies, and to show, even though you have cheaper supplies, you don't have to go out and buy super expensive supplies to make really nice artwork. And black and white or grayscale artwork is just as beautiful as color artwork. So that's kind of the point, and also to help you guys learn how to use graphite. I love graphite. Graphite and charcoal I'm at home with. So anyway, all of that being said, we will finally start on this project. I'm going to go ahead and put a glassine on here so I don't rub off my lines on this side, because they are quite light, though I do still have my paper on here, so if I need to add the lines back in, I can just flip it down, it will be lined up, and it will be fine. But I prefer not to do that if I can avoid it. So one of the things I did before stream is I noticed where my darkest lines were, and all I did was I darkened up those lines right here, just so I didn't have to sit here and figure out where they were and look like really close and stuff, because you want your lines to be as light as possible. You don't want to see your line work underneath your final work if you're going for realism, okay? So I always like to start with my lightest pencil regardless of how dark I'm going. The reason for this is it fills in the tooth of the paper, and then as you go darker, then it will just kind of blend together, and it'll go into it so you don't have all these gaps in your art piece. So I'm going to start with my 2H, and I'm going to lightly fill in some of these darker branches. I'm going to look at my reference, and I'm not putting a lot of pressure. I'm going to hold my pencil near the back like this. This way I don't mash the tooth of the paper. And it doesn't have to be exactly like the reference, just a hint of the reference. And if you guys have any questions, be sure to ask. It doesn't matter what the question is, just ask the question, because surely somebody else will have a similar question or is wondering the same thing. So please ask any questions you have. There is no ridiculous question or anything like that. If you don't know, you don't know, and I'm happy to share with you what I know. Now keep in mind, this is not the only way to do this. This is the way I'm doing it. So I'm just putting in some values in here, kind of looking at my reference and seeing roughly how thick the branches are, where they're going, and things like that. Hey Jelena, welcome. So glad you could join. It's a little stick that goes up here. And then another one that comes up here. So you'll notice if you follow the line drawing that I gave you, some of these lines are a little bit wider, some of them are a little bit narrower. Just look at the reference, because like this one on my reference, there was a big old thing right here, but that's because there's a little knot. And I didn't go back in and then come back out. So just look at your reference and see what's there. And then that comes down. Playtime, yes. Playtime is always good. So I'm only going to this branch here. If you'll look on the reference photo, you'll notice I'm kind of separating it because this is kind of a separate entity from this section here. So I like to work in sections, seeing what works or what is sectioned off in the different areas. This is a pretty thin line. So we had a little bit of excitement before stream. My dog, studio assistant number 2, decided she was going to go play with a wasp. So she got stung. So we're keeping an eye on her to see if we're going to have to take her in or not. I'm hoping not, because I'll tell you what, that dog is just driving me nuts. But we're going to keep an eye on her, see how she does. She wasn't putting any weight on the foot. It's on her paw. So she wasn't really putting any weight on the foot. It does bother her. Gave her some Benadryl. She doesn't like ice. We tried putting the ice on it. She doesn't like it. So we'll have to see how that goes. I'm hoping for the better, because I really can't do another vet bill right now. Nice. Sergi says he's starting from the bottom up. I typically do this manner in most cases, just because since I'm right-handed, that way I don't keep putting my hand over the areas I've already worked. That's why I work in this manner. Again, if you want to work in a different order, feel free. Whatever you're comfortable doing. It's kind of a little knot thing right here. And that goes into this. I'm trying out charcoal, doing a portrait for fun. The charcoal isn't moving around on the paper the way I expected. Maybe I'm using the wrong paper. Jelena, what charcoal are you using and what paper are you using? Paper definitely makes a huge difference, but the charcoal you're using makes a huge difference as well. Depending upon the charcoal, some charcoal is impregnated with other things. So if it's a charcoal that is impregnated with something that keeps it from moving around, that's something that you want to be aware of. And there's kind of a little stick thing here. This kind of goes up. Generals. Okay, Generals charcoal is pretty good. Are you using the 4B Generals? Is it the pencils, or, well, I'm assuming it's the pencils. So one thing about, depending upon what's the subject that you're drawing. Okay, I'm going in with my 2B now, and I'm going to darken these up. I'm not really paying, it's still too light, so I'm not paying attention too much to where the darker areas are. I just want this whole branch to be a little bit darker and filled in. And since I have the basic shape already in here, and I'm not really paying attention to where the super darks are, then I'm not too concerned with much of anything else, so I can fill this in fairly rapidly with this 2B. 2B, 4B, 6B. Hey, me! Welcome! I'm so glad you could join. Okay, what is your subject you're doing? Are you doing like a portrait? What I like to do is I like to rub it on, if I don't need, if I want it very smooth, okay, and I don't need the texture, then I use a paintbrush. So I'll use a flathead paintbrush because that's what I like to use. And I'll rub it on a piece of paper such as this. So I'll get like a nice little circle or something like that. And then I'll pick it up with my paintbrush and then I will put it on my paper. It will take a little bit of getting used to. Smart Service cartridge, heavyweight from Windsor. Okay, so this should work just fine on that. So what I would do is I would put it on a piece over here, right? And then I would take your brush and rub it on there and then transfer it over to, okay, so it's a face. Transfer it over to your piece. The reason being is you're going to get very soft gradients. It's going to take a little bit to build up the color and value, but you will have a very smooth surface. Once you get into the hair, then I would use the pencil and I would pull it down, you know, your strands or clumps down with your pencil and then soften it with your paintbrush. I use a paintbrush a lot when I'm using graphite. I'm sorry, not graphite. You can use it with graphite too, but with charcoal, I use a lot of paintbrush. So that might be an option if you haven't thought of that, to try the paintbrush. The blending stump, I do use a little bit with it. It depends upon what I'm doing. I did a monkey and charcoal on my channel. You can kind of, it's a speed drawing, but you can kind of see how I use the tools in that video if you want to take a look at it. There's no hair in this one. Okay. If there's no hair, then I would just do it that way. Use the paintbrush method. I very rarely, unless there's wrinkles or something along those lines, I very rarely actually put the pencil on like a face or something like that, just because I don't like the lines that it leaves. Okay, I'm hopping over to the 4B and I'm going to start looking where some of these shadows are. Notice I haven't really blended out yet very much, and I will blend after the 4B. So for this, I'm going to basically do the bottom of the branch and leave the top open, because when we blend, it will blend over into the top area. So notice I only put it on the bottom here, and the top is, let me see if you can see pretty good. And the top is, blending stuff works too. I also use the blending stuff. I use the paintbrush to bring it over and blend it a little bit, and then I use the blending step to even move it further. So I typically use a combination of the two, depending upon what it needs in the certain areas for the charcoal. Okay, this whole area is pretty dark, and then there's a dark area right there, so I'm just going to put a little Doom-a-Bob. The technical term is Doom-a-Bob. And then we'll go up there. It's going to be a little bit here. Let's see. I agree. It's the method I use to get a lot to get. Yeah. So the blending, I think the blending stump and the paintbrush in charcoal is probably the best bet. I wanted to try the ghost method freehand drawing instead of using the square grid drawing for a change. Nice. Make sure you post your work in share your art with Xrissart. We would love to see, even in progress. I always like to see in progress photos because it's always fun to see how people work, the different methods people use and work in. Okay, this here is pretty dark. Notice now we're starting to get a little bit of dimension. And a little bit right here. And right in here. Okay, so now I'm going to take my little blending stump. I'm going to blend. I'm just going to go up and down and make sure it's fairly smooth and it's blended. I'll make adjustments later on this, but I just want to get some of these values in so that way when we start working on the back branches, then number one, we have a nice map, and number two, we have something to pull from. Now, because I'm working on sketching paper, it's not going to be as smooth as, say, a Bristol smooth paper. So depending on what paper you're working on. If you're working on a cartridge paper, it'll be a little bit smoother than my sketch paper. So I'm going to have a bit more texture than somebody that's working on a smoother piece of paper. But again, this is what was chosen, so because I'm sticking with the challenge, I wanted to stick with that. It looks horrible at the moment, no matter how it turns out. I'll post it. Okay, yeah. Keep layering. And also, the Kneaded Eraser is your friend with charcoal as well. So if you just tap to lighten areas, that will also help. And then you can soften it by using your blending stump and soften it back into the lighter areas. So Kneaded Eraser is also your friend. Okay, now I'm going to start working on some of these lines in the back. One way you can do that is using your blending stump that you just have all this graphite on already, right? The end already has graphite. So the more you work, the lighter it will become. It's going to be pretty dark. So I'm going to start in the darker areas, and I'm going to lightly put in some of these branches. And I'm roughly, there's just a ton of lines in here. So I'm just going to roughly put them in. This one here is pretty dark. Pull some from here. Darken this up. It's a pretty thick branch. And there's really no rhyme or reason. Well, there is rhyme or reason, but... And if you get a little bit dark, that's okay. If you get a little bit dark, take your Kneaded Eraser and dab. If you dab, it'll push it back. Notice how it pushed it back, okay? So this is one way to make all of these branches in the back, is just use your blending stump with the graphite on it already. And it's already looking like it's in the fog because of the way it's a very light value, right? That is one way to do this. Another way to create these values, okay, is I'm going to use my 2H pencil. And I'm going to come down here. Let's see. Let's go right in here. I'm going here, and I'm going to start with my lightest, darkest, well, the darkest, lighter area, branch, whatever I'm trying to say. And I'm going to go very light, and I'm just going to put a bunch of branches in here. Notice how light it is. Let me see if I can zoom into this area. Okay, notice how light. I'm putting hardly any pressure in here because there's hardly any, it's very light. Okay, this is another way to make these light branches. Okay, once I get some of those in, if they're a little too dark, which these are fine, but I'm going to just show you, if they're a little too dark, tap, and I'll push it back, okay? So this is another way to create those light branches. I'm using my 2H again. And if you find you're going too dark, just push it back with your eraser. And that's going to give that foggy look. Hey Diane and Rob, hey, welcome, welcome. So glad you guys could join in. Okay, I'm going to show you another way to do these lovely branches. So I have my, if you have a water soluble pencil like this, what I like to do is I like to touch it. I'm going to come out because this way you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to put this back where it goes. Okay, so I touch it, and because it's full strength, I'm going to touch it on here. Look how dark that is. If I put that on there, that would be too dark. So I touch it a couple times on there, and then I make my line down here. Again, I'm going to touch a couple times. And I'm going to come in and create these lines. This one got a little dark right here, so I'm just rubbing it out. Once it dries, I can lighten it up if I have my kneaded eraser. I can also lighten it up a little bit. I kind of really like this look with the water soluble combined, especially in this misty appearance. It just gives it like a totally different feel. So that's 3 different ways that I showed you that you can make these very light branches, which will give you that misty look. The best way to make this misty look is to tap some of that out. Is to just make it very, very faint. I rented a picture of an elephant a few months ago. I was doing graphite because I couldn't draw trees and bushes, so this is a great tuition for me. Hey Wicked, welcome. Trees, you know, it's funny you mention that. So I have a love-hate relationship with doing trees because they always look like just a bunch of worms and a bunch of lines on the paper when I'm doing it. And I'm like, oh man, this looks like horrible. And then once I step back away from it, then I'm like, well, it doesn't look as bad as I thought, you know. But it always looks like just a bunch of random lines just kind of thrown in there. So I get where you're going with that, because now I love doing close-up trees. It's when I get into these crazy branches where it goes crazy on me. But the good thing about this particular reference is there's just a ton of them. So you can kind of put lines basically anywhere. Just make sure you're going in a familiar direction and you're good to go. Hey Diane, welcome. I didn't see you pop in. Shame on me. Working into the month deadlines and snuck up on me. Thank you, Diane. Now this one got really, really dark. I don't want it that dark. Well, I guess it would be okay. Like, and it'll lighten up just a little bit when it dries as well, so. I am recording this, so there will be a time lapse of this when we're completely done with the project. So you can kind of, I kind of like time lapses. I know some people don't, but I also like time lapses because you can kind of see the piece come together, and it's kind of just cool to watch. It's like, it looks like a bunch of random lines or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's like an actual tree there. It's kind of like a really cool sensation type thing. Yes, you can use the other side of the paper, Janice. Can you take your kneaded eraser and put it in a what you call it, like a tube, and try rolling it. Put some pressure on it and try rolling it across like this on your paper, and it'll help pull some of that off. But yeah, you can definitely use the other side if you want. Depend upon, did you end up using the Bristol Smooth? The texture, sometimes the texture on the back of the paper is just a little bit different. It could be smoother, it could be a little bit rougher. So just keep that in mind. It's not a problem. It'll work fine. But if you started out with the Bristol Smooth, then I would definitely. Oh, thank you. This is a bit tedious. I mean, there's a lot of branches here, guys. Like, You can also use this technique in conjunction with the pencils. So like you can put like your really lightest ones in like this, and then go back with your pencils and like bring in some of your darker branches. So there's a lot of uses for this technique. Bristle smooth. Okay, cool. Hey, Monty, how are you? Aw, you have to work. Sorry to hear that. Is it? It's early for you. It's like going on 4. I just noticed the reference photo you are working from. I love the atmosphere of it. I thought you would have done the background first, then the dark foreground trees last. Yeah, the reason I did it this way is so I can pull color from our graphite. Graphite. I guess that's a good. It's 320. Ah, yes. So I could pull from it with my blending snap. And I didn't want to lose the lines because there's so many lighter lines behind it. I didn't want to lose those either, so typically I do the background and then the foreground. But again, it depends upon the piece. About 90% of the time, that's how I do it. Oh, nice. You gotta remember, you can use your pencil, your 2H pencil, to do this. Yeah, sometimes planning raw definitely helps the flow. Um, Again, it really depends upon the piece, the uh, medium I'm working in. There's a lot of factors that determine which way that I work. I did one not too long ago that did I combine? No, I did not combine. I ended up working the background and then part of the foreground because the foreground was blurry, but I couldn't do the whole thing because it was a person. So then I had to do the person, and I had like these blossoms coming over her face and stuff, so I had to wait to do those even though part of them were in the background. So I did part of them, and then I did her face, and then I did the rest of them. It was kind of weird. Well, Sergio, that sounds like you have a challenge there. Good thing this is a challenge piece, huh? That is one of the downfalls about using, cheaper papers and stuff like that, is there are some inconsistencies. And we always say, the supplies matter that you use. The paper, the type of supplies, it all affects everything. That's not to say you can't make good art with the, value supplies, because you certainly can. Okay, so you can kind of see the effect this is getting. I want to let that dry because I do want to lighten some of that up. So I'm going to use my 2H, and I'm going to do the rest of these. Let's see, there are some nice little, it's actually part of a major part of the tree. It's not just branches up here. And this too is part of the major part of the tree, so I'm going to darken that up a little bit more than I would for some of the other areas. Now a 2H pencil will not move as far as, say, a 2B pencil, so you need to keep that in mind when you're blending out. Go ahead and use my 2H in some of these areas where I feel it needs a little bit more attention. It's kind of a random, I'm not really paying, I'm looking at the reference, but you'll notice the lines kind of go every which way. So as long as you have the main branches in there, and then you have a similar direction to the growth, they should be good. And you can put as many or as little branches in here as you want. You certainly don't have to put as many that are in the reference if you don't want them in there. You can make it a little bit lighter. Can you kind of see how, let me pull this down just a little bit, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see. I went the right direction this time. How exciting. Can you kind of see how this is a little bit dark? So I'm going to take and knead this in a kind of a thin area. And then I'm going to take these darker and I'm going to just erase some of them to lighten them up. Now if it was just the regular graphite pencil, I could dab it, but because it is water soluble, I do need to rub just a little bit. And it lightened up just enough. It's not a lot, but it's enough. Do not come off. Wrong direction again. I know, I'm gonna make you guys sick doing this. In and out, I'm sure. But I wanna make sure I stay in frame for you guys too, so. Okay, I'm going to take the lighter end and blend this out just a little bit. It does have some graphite on it, sticking to the main tree branches. And then dab, dab, dab. Now once I get all of these in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with some graphite and I'm going to kind of blur it all with my blending stuff. I need to clarify that. Okay, I'm going in with my 2H again, putting in these main faded branches. This goes here. This is a main branch. Do Kneaded Erasers last? Yes, they last a really long time. I've had this one, I don't know, 4 years, 3 years. It's getting to where I need to change it. You can tell when you need to change it because number one, you can tell like a really big difference in color. Also, it gets hard. So once it starts getting hard, then, or when you pull it apart, like it doesn't have as much elastic. Like this still has quite a bit of elastic, but once you get this like really, really full, it'll start breaking like really easy like that. So I did that on purpose. So, you know, this still has quite a bit of elastic, so it's not quite time to change it, but it's getting there. So okay, that one, let's see, this is the dark. This comes down. And there's quite a few thicker branches that are up in here. So we're going to put those in. Just using the reference as a semi-guide. You're welcome. Let me see. I think I have a new one. Yeah. I have a new one here. This one's. So you can kind of see where it's a little bit darker. So it's not bad. I've only thrown away one so far. I think I have 2 going. I've only thrown away one so far, and that's when I was working with charcoal. And of course, charcoal is really dark, and it became almost black before I ended up throwing it away. So they last quite a while. Faber-Castell is probably one of the better ones. The Prismacolor I have because that's what came with one of my sets or something. But if you're gonna buy it, I recommend the Faber-Castell one. They're really, really nice. Okay, let's see what we have going on here. We have this tree coming down kind of like this, and then it kind of goes up. Let's see. Almost touches this tree right here and then comes back out. And then it winds back in and then back out. So this is the thin tree. Again, keeping it very light. Now keep in mind, I don't use my kneaded eraser probably as much as I probably should. So that also, like, I just make up for it. If I freehand drew a lot, when I freehand draw, I use the eraser a lot more, for sure. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put some of these darker branches in, just like I did up on top, since I'm starting to work down in this area. I do not want to lose these lines. Looking to see how thick they are. Looking at the different shapes of these branches, adjusting them. Again, my line drawing is just a rough line drawing to just get the basic shapes in. So I didn't put like a lot of the knots in or anything like that. So feel free to add those in so they're not just a bunch of straight sticks. Then again, parts of them are going to be a little bit wider than what I put in there. This is dark here. And then there is one that goes up. Not quite as thick as the line, but that's okay. We'll just make adjustments. Since we have so many lines in the background, it's not going to matter. You're not going to see the other part of the lines. Okay, and then there's a little thing that comes out. And then the end of this has kind of this little weird thing too. And then this has a little thing that comes out as well. And there's a darker branch here. Just making sure I got all the darker branches in before I take my darker pencil. Okay, just like up on top, I'm going with the 2B. And again, I'm going to smooth a lot of this out. Like, it'll still be rough like this. I will smooth a lot of it out after the fact, but I don't want to lose these lines. So I want to make sure I get them in. And it also helps me to judge my values of the lighter branches, so I know how dark or light I need to go with them. So it kind of works twofold. This one kind of turns in like so. That branch actually starts down here, so we'll just leave that part there. Changing it up a little bit from what I already did. And I'll go ahead and put these in as well. Yeah, I know, I didn't start with the 2H, but yeah, no. This is a good example of, you know, you can start with the 2H. If it's working, I'm just going to do it with the 2B right now because that's what's in my hand and I'm lazy. And I know I have to go back over this anyway, so. But notice the difference when you have the 2H here, right? You see a nice, you don't have as much skipping, to where down here you have quite a bit of skipping because you don't have that color first, or the 2H first, filling in those things. It'll be fine for me. I'm going to fill it in after the fact, knowing I have to go back over this. Okay, now I'm going to use my 4B and get those darkers in. Notice I'm skipping areas because you have lights and darks. You can always pull the dark into the lighter area, but lightening it up sometimes is difficult, so. If given the choice, I will use a smaller, darker area and pull it out and then expand it as I need. This one's very dark. Now keep in mind, you can use a paintbrush if you want to blend some of this out. That's perfectly fine. I may or may not end up grabbing a paintbrush near the end to get a little bit more misty appearance. We'll have to see how it goes. I am not sure on that right now. Every piece I do is kind of a trial and error. It's like, well, what works for this piece? Because each piece demands different things. So I just take what my knowledge from other things and other projects that I've done, regardless of whether it's colored pencil or graphite or whatever, charcoal, and then I go from there. Thinking out loud is good. We can't add anything additional to it, but if you wanted to change the man to an elephant, you can do something along those lines. But to actually add anything else, if you're staying with the challenge itself, if you're going to stay with the challenge, going back to the 2H pencil, if you're going to stay within the challenge parameters, then we can't add any additional things. You can use creative license and change a few things here and there, but adding an additional thing was not part of the parameters that we put in there. Definitely has to be recognizable as the reference. Putting in some of the thicker branches of the faded trees now that I have the darker. Oh dude, I didn't put the darker on this. What is wrong with me? There we go. So just putting in some of the thicker branches, and then once I get the thicker branches in, then I can go in and put the random branches. Let's see, this kind of goes up and around like so. And then this one from here goes this way. And then we have this large tree here. Notice it's not a completely straight edge. There are little knots and ridges, so we want to make sure that we don't make it completely straight when we're going up. Adds a little bit of interest. Let's see here, this comes up like so. That's all good, Ron. Yeah, the man, he's in there. Now, if you're like me, I am kind of getting bored of doing these trees. But I know it's important to get these trees done. Like, I wouldn't mind going over and maybe doing the man or the walkway or the grass down here, but I'm going to try to stick to the trees without jumping around too much. I have a really bad habit of jumping around a lot. So, y'all that jump around, I do it too. Especially when there's a lot of one subject, it's really hard to just stay on that side. Okay, this kind of goes up here like so. And there's another one that comes out like this, and it goes, kind of splits off, so it goes like that, and then there's another one, comes off like this, and it goes this way, and it goes this way. Now when you're making these, one of the key things to do is kind of be loose with your arm and kind of use your arm. When you're making these branches, it helps to give a little bit looser feel and natural curvature. Okay, there's another branch that kind of comes off like so, and up. And then that meets there. Then this one breaks off and comes down to right about here. Into nothing is what it ends up going into. And this one's a fairly thick branch, so I'm going to go ahead and thicken it up. There's one that comes kind of here. So basically right now I'm just kind of sketching the different branches in here because these are very light, so it's kind of essentially like a light sketch anyway, because you just want the hint of them. And notice I am holding my pencil way back here. In the back of the pencil, it keeps your strokes very loose and fluid. This is a little bit wider than what I have. And again, I'm just using the reference as a guide to some of these branches and the direction to put them. How thick to make the area with the different thinner branches. If I see that some of these lines are getting lost, the main branches are getting lost, which is why I put them in first, then I will just darken them up just a little bit. You can kind of see how we're already getting that fuzzy look. We haven't even really created the mist, so to speak, but we're just getting that fuzzy look just from using a very light pencil. So it gives that illusion of mist. And notice I'm not holding my pencil up, I'm holding it to the side. Okay, I am seeing a couple of more dominant branches in here, so I'm going to go ahead and darken a couple of these up. Let's see, there seems to be a dark branch that kind of comes up and around. Now, if you look in this area here, it's quite gray. But if we just colored it all gray, we wouldn't have these really nice branches in here. So we're just going to make it a little bit denser. And then we'll blend it out a little bit to blur it with the blending stump is what we're going to do. Especially in this area because it's kind of very blurry in that area. And we'll have a little bit of graphite on the blending stump already, so it will also help create some of those illusions as well. And then once we blend it out, if we need to put a little bit more detail back in, we can do that very easily with our pencil or the blending stump, depending upon the sharpness of the detail you want in the area. My hair's driving me nuts. Okay, let's see. This is a little bit wider, so I'm going to widen this one up. I think I'm going to create a little bit of a curvature or a sharp turn right here, like a knot, and have it fade in very thin. And this one I'm going to actually cross over. Have it go up into here. So I'm using a little bit of artistic license here. Again, not really paying super close attention to the reference as to where these branches are. There's branches there, but it's just a rough estimate. Just have to have the appearance of them, not necessarily perfect. Okay, so what's going on here? Here we have another branch coming from this tree. I think I'll have that one come up and turn right here. You'll notice the more lines you put in, some of them get pushed back, some of them get brought forward. So it kind of looks like it's coming from different trees, which is really cool. So I feel this one doesn't have enough lines going this direction. It seems like everything's going this way, which would be the stuff in the front. So I'm going to put some more lines going this direction. And then I'm going to go back over the 3 main branches and pull them back out so they don't get lost. Now, as we get farther down, we're going to get less dense, especially down in here. So we want to, when we get farther down, we want to make a little bit more effort to pay attention to where some of the branches go and where some of the branches are. Studio assistant number 1 has come to visit. Hi, baby. Go lay down. You can go lay down. Go lay down. Do you guys have any questions? How are you guys doing? For those of you that are following along. Nobody said that my face was half out of the frame here. Your studio assistant is meeting his college mates, huh? Nice. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, trees take patience. That's for sure. Leilani is with me. She has to come up and stay with me quite often. But everybody's home, so a lot of times she'll just be downstairs when everybody's home, but she likes to come up and stay with me when I'm arting. If I'm the only one home, then she typically stays with me all day. She typically doesn't leave my side. See, right now I feel like these look like just a bunch of random lines. Like, it doesn't really look tree-like to me. But I know that it is tree-like because all I'm seeing are lines. But that's because I'm not thinking of it as a tree. I'm thinking of it, okay, there's a line here. I need to have a gap here or whatever. So I'm not really thinking of it, so to speak, as a tree. You're engrossed. That's awesome. Yes, Rob. Patience. Patience is important for trees. Like I said, I feel like these are just a bunch of random lines, and I'm just like, wow, this is looking bad. But then when I step back, I'm like, oh no, it actually does look like. It's weird how your brain does that. It's the strangest thing, I think. And I know I need to darken this trunk, and I'll bring it a little bit forward. So because I'm still working very light, it's kind of weird as well. I'm varying the pressure that I put on my pencil as I create some of these branches, so it gives it different values as I come up and down that one branch. Now over here is where it starts to get a little bit tricky because you have some open areas that don't have a lot of branches. So it's not going to be as dense as say here or right here. darkening this up just a bit, putting in a few additional branches. Okay, just throwing a few, just trying to pay attention to some of this. I'll be coming back to watch the progression of this drawing later. The plain truth is I've been up way too long and eyes are heavy. I should not have gotten up at 2:20 knowing I wanted to see this stream. All good, Steve. Come back when you can. It'll be up, so feel free to come back and watch it. I'm glad you could join in for a little bit. Get some rest, man. Get some rest. Thanks for dropping in. Did you buy house chores? But funny thing, these is the worst one I had. Really wicked. Interesting. I think the different colors do have different softnesses. Because I know there's like a red one, a gray one, a yellow one. I think there's even a blue one, which is different than the blue tack. Because a lot of people use that blue tack as well for lifting off graphite. So there's a lot of different things on or products out there that you can use to lift graphite off. Oh, it's all good, Steve. I appreciate that you came by for a little bit. And you get some rest. And you know, if you have any questions, just message me and I'll be happy to answer any of them that you may have. And that goes with everybody here. If you have questions, just message me on Facebook and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Or you can type it in the video, whichever way you want to do it. I always answer. I notice when I'm making my branch lines, I'm trying not to just go like constant, the same stroke. I'm trying to do like little squiggles, and because branches aren't typically straight, there's a lot of movement to them. So I try to make some of that movement. And then of course they have the Ys that branch off. I haven't slowed down since 6 a.m. Absolutely going to catch the replay. See y'all on Wednesday. I love you guys. Okay, Peggy, thanks for dropping by. Totally understand. I'm glad you could drop by for a little bit. Thank you. How do you feel about filling the tooth of the paper with graphite? I'm having somewhat of a hard time over getting the smooth jet black I desire. Since I haven't started the smooth jet black, I am good to go. It will be a little bit of a challenge, Sergio. Because as you saw up here, it's still kind of a little rough. But as I add in more value, I'm hoping it will smooth out a bit. Might have to pull out the paintbrush for that one. Okay, so now that we're getting down to the nitty-gritty down here, I'm going to go ahead and put in some of these lower random branches. Because it's not as dense, so this part will go fairly quickly. 3 hours 58. Oh good, I'm glad you guys are learning a bit. I'm trying to keep my strokes a little bit looser, a little not so straight, because branches are not really straight. Don't forget there are Y's in the branches, so we have to consider that as well. I think for this piece, these branches right here are probably going to be the most time consuming on this side. Yes, there's branches on the, well, I don't know, the grass might be kind of time consuming too, depending upon how I end up doing it. But there's so many little branches. It just takes a while to do. It's not that it's hard, it just takes a bit of time, that's all. Okay, now get back into the thicker mass of branches. Okay, Janice, have a good one. Take care. I will see you soon. Thanks for coming by. Really appreciate it. Okay, so these areas here are going to be much darker than this 2H. So what I'm going to do in these darker areas, like in this section here, is I'm going to blend out with my paper stump, blending stump. And I'm going to go back in and put some of the branch details back in with a darker pencil and probably blend out again, just to get that color variation and gloomy appearance. Okay, there's a bit down in here, very lightly. Some offshoots coming up in here. Oh, nice. I like the Arches hot press paper. Quite a bit, actually. Okay, so I'm going to take my blending stump, and it does have a little bit of graphite on it. I'm going to start with the bigger branches. I'm going to look at my reference to see where I need to add this gray. I'm changing to my bigger blending stump because that one's just not working for me. It's bending too much. Now I'm not putting a lot of pressure on the blending stump itself. I'm just basically graying a lot of this out is basically what I'm doing. Giving it that murky feel. Okay, this is where it starts getting darker, so I'm going to pull these darker branches into here to make it a little bit darker than up in here. Okay, there's quite a few lighter areas, so I'm going to just use more of my point in these areas here. Okay, now I'm going back over to the side. If you're losing your detail, you can see where I kind of lost some of my detail here. There's no major tree limbs or anything here. This one I can still see, so I can go back over it. But you want to make sure you can still see your major tree limbs and the approximation of where they are. If you cannot, then go back in and put a little bit more value and then go back and blend. And this is where we're going to start getting that nice, murky, misty type of look. Now I am going to blend this tree stump, staying on the tree stump, not really going off it. The same with this one. Because I have graphite on my blending stump from blending the other areas, it's easy to just drop it off as you blend. And notice how it softens up these limbs and makes it look a little bit blurrier. pull some of this dark down into here. So essentially I'm using parts of my painting as, or drawing as a palette. So I'm going over this dark area, and then I want this area to be darker, so I'm going to just pull it down into here. I use a soft dry brush to do this. Yes, a soft dry brush works great too. There's so many ways to do things. So, I mean, like I said, I'm just showing you the way that I'm approaching this particular project. I do use paintbrushes sometimes I don't. So, you know, do what works for you and the supplies you have and all of that. There are so many ways to get to the final result. Everybody worries about, oh, well, am I doing it right? Well, there's no right or wrong way. You do what works for you. And I'm always, you know, telling people this. Do what works for you. Experiment. You know, I'm showing you one way. You'll see somebody else work in a different manner. Well, which manner works for you? Maybe you need to combine the two. When you combine the different things that you see, your techniques, that's when you start creating your own style, because now you're making stylistic choices because you have more knowledge on what you can and can't do, what your pencils can and can't do, or medium, or whatever you're using. So it's always good to experiment. And sometimes, like, I'll have an idea and I'll be like, okay, well, I can go in and do this. And then I start doing it in the way I thought would work, and it doesn't work. So then I have to figure out, well, this isn't working. What can I do to make it work? So sometimes it's just trial and error as you do. I do a lot of trial and error as I do. Like, a lot. Me too, Money. I like adding a lot of different techniques as well. Blending stumps are really fun. I spend a lot of time with my blending stumps on graphite. Especially when I want to get like super, super smooth appearances, like on faces and things like that. I like to use my blending stumps a lot. Okay, now that I have that in, I'm going to go in with, let's do a 2B. I'm going to go up and I'm going to start defining. Why is there hair up here? There's a hair up here. Is it my hair or is it the dog's hair? I don't know. It needs to get off of my art piece though. Come on, hair. There we go. It must be my hair because it's longer than my dog's hair. Okay. You've never used the blending stumps, Money? Really? I'm going in with my 2B and I'm going to start defining some of these darker areas on these darker branches. And once I do that, then I'm going to pull out some of the detail in the background branches. So I'm going to pull some more, because now we have a nice gray area. So now I'm going to pull out, or after the fact, I'm going to pull out some of the darker branches. Okay, I'm going to take my blending stump and I'm just going to blend this out to take a look at what it looks like. Right now I'm getting an idea how many layers am I going to have to do to get the final appearance that I want for these darker branches. It's kind of what I'm doing right now. And I like to do it in a small area. Will Chibi and Tober? Probably not. I will probably show up and watch them, but I'm probably not going to do anything. Like put my portrait in. I don't have a full body portrait like he wants. So going back in again with my 2B, darkening this up. I don't want to put a lot of pressure on. Now I can make it darker if I put pressure on it, but I don't want to put the pressure on it because I don't want to flatten the tooth of the paper. So because I do want it darker in some of the areas, I'm going to change to my 4B. I'm going to use my 4B and I'm going to go in and I'm going to put some of these darker. I'm not going all the way down because if you look at the reference, it's not all the way down. Just a brush finger. You could also try eyeshadow pads. Yes, the eyeshadow pads work pretty well too. I randomly put this little branch in. I don't know why I put it in, but it's there, so we're just gonna roll with it. Let's see. You could. I'm sure my 16-year-old has some of those. I bought paper stump back years ago. Barely touched them. Now I can usually use them. One for ACO background, usually a small one. Yeah, but you work very small too, so I don't know that you would need them as much as well. I mean, all supplies have their place, really. Like, and some people like, you know, just like everything, some people like working with the blending stumps. Some people do not. Some people like using tissues more than, say, the blending stump. For me, I do use tissue sometimes. Not very often because I can't see where I'm putting it sometimes. So I usually only use it in larger areas where I don't really need precision. I'm varying my pressure. I use just a regular pressure here on the edge, and then I very lightly go over this top area just to darken it, but it gives it more value without having to pick up the darker or the lighter pencil. That's perfect, Ronnie. You don't, like I said, you know, you can use the line drawing. You don't have to use the line drawing. It's really up to you. I mean, use your creative license. As long as we can tell that, you know, it resembles this piece, have at it, you know. I always encourage everybody to make their own line drawings anyway, so I just made it easier for those that did not want to and they wanted to follow along. So by all means, you know, use whatever method you want to use. And that's what makes everybody's pieces unique. I mean, you know, if 5 of us are doing a piece, it could be the difference between just freehanding, like something like this, trees, where some have a thicker tree line, some have thinner. It could be the colors, but since this is monotone, then it'll be like how deep you make your shadows, how thick you make your fog. You know, you have a lot of leeway here. There's a lot of things you can do. Playing poker. Rob. You know, like, and I think this is my opinion, and I use it on colored pencils especially, is by you not having the, you know, by you doing the no blending policy or whatever that you did for a while, you really got to know your pencils and your tools that you did use to create your piece. And I think that's a really smart way about going and doing your art pieces, because you learn the limitations. You learn different ways you can use your pencil to get those looks and appearances that you want. I think that way too often we as artists, we want to try to get through things so quickly that we lose sight of, you know, oh, well, I'm just going to use this tool and not really, just because it's easier. Well, just because it's easier doesn't mean you necessarily have all the ins and outs either. So I think it's really smart to try different things and use different, like, don't use any blending tools for like several pieces, and then explore the different blending tools and blending methods you have. I think that's very, very smart. And you really, really do learn about your, I'm just going to say stuff for lack of my brain working, because apparently my brain's not going to work. You just learn about your stuff. How's that? Exactly, Money. Exactly. Because, you know, the way I shade may be different from the way you shade. And I agree, when you don't follow the reference to a T, you are a bit looser. I mean, I'm learning that as I am doing my looser style watercolors and stuff. It's a challenge, but you know, because I'm so used to being super, super tight with my artwork, and it's like everything has to be, it's very precision based, but that's not where I want to end up. So trying new things. Yeah, my brain stops working. Or thingamajig or doomabob. Yeah, those are common vocabulary words with me. You know, that thingamajig. And notice, because I'm darkening this up, it's pushing all of this back. The stuff that we already did, it's really pushing it back. Because we're making this darker, it's bringing it a bit more forward. Yeah, I totally agree, Moni, because I've worked in the, this has to be perfect and this line has to be there, and I'm over it. It's time to move on from that. I know I can do it. One of my goals when I first started doing art is like, wow, I want to be able to draw realistically. That was what I wanted to learn. And for the most part, I think, no, I'm not a master, but I can draw realistically in most cases. So now I want to explore the more abstract, looser, less is more type of thing. So it's time to start exploring and creating my own type of style and seeing where it goes. Many people use blending as a crutch to make up for the lack of skill over blending, stuff like that. Hard to word it right. Oh, I totally understand what you're saying. I agree. So it must be a good thing to focus more on blending with pencils while developing your skills. Don't abuse the blending tools. Yes, exactly. And I have to say, I was guilty of using the blending stumps too much as well. But I do tend to use them a lot for portraits because I just want that soft look. But paper, I have to say, paper has a lot to do with it, especially in portraits. If you use the right paper, you don't need the blending stumps as much. With this paper here, because it's sketch paper and it's kind of rough, you're kind of relying a little bit on the blending stumps to get a little bit smoother appearance, just because it is it's the nature of the paper. If I used a smoother paper like Bristol Smooth or something like that, I wouldn't rely on them so much because it would just naturally be smooth. Might just have to touch it a couple times and done, but this, you really have to work at it a bit more. Oh, thanks, Money. I actually used to, when I freehand everything, like completely, I do a lot of ghost drawing because number one, it's easier to erase mistakes. So if your lines aren't right, then it's way easier to erase than if your lines are very dark. So I do that a lot when I freehand things. Make sure my proportions are correct and all of that. It takes more time for me because I don't do it as often as I should. But I kind of like using the ghost drawing. And I kind of just taught myself that because even in my drawing class that I took, where I found out that I could draw, that's kind of how I just started. I just started like, oh, well, I'm going to put a really light, thin line here that you can barely see just to make sure everything's good. And once I find everything's good, that's when I start doing the details and putting in the actual values that I need. And I kind of approach my work when I put details in, even with having the drawing on first. I go very light anyway, and I build up my layers. Ha! Money. Even blending properly, having control, result takes skill practice, and I have close to none, so gotta work on that now. Your work is really good, Wicked. Like, you have a lot of skill. It might be a little bit different than what you're wanting at this point, but you do have a lot of skill already. Just checked out your page. What are you doing amongst those graphite pads? Sergio. Oh, Wicked, you're so funny. I agree with you. When I started graphite drawing many moons ago, I'm 64 now, I didn't even know blending tools existed, so I had to learn how much pressure to use. Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's why, you know, it's important. That's why it's really important to know why there exists a 2B and a 4B and an 8B and all that, because that is the whole point of those pencils, is to give you those ranges without getting a lot of that pressure. Trying to create this little knot here. That kind of looks weird. I'm okay with it. Okay, we're going back in with the 2H. This is very rough, so we're going to fill this in with the 2H. I kind of mentioned this would happen when we got down here, because I didn't do the 2H first, so it is a bit rough. But we will survive. And then I want to fix some of this up here with this 2H, because it's light, but it has a few darker spots. So we're going to take the 2H and just create a little bit more of a punch there. Okay, Monty, thank you for coming by. Really appreciate it. And I will see you again. And if you decide to do this, make sure you post, and I can, don't forget, deadline's the 20th of December. So you have lots of time if you want to give it a try, and I can put you in the showcase. Have a good day at work. Okay, so now I'm going to go back up here into these areas and just put some of these thicker branches back in. It's all about the layering. I will also use my Tombow mono eraser in here to pull out some of these negative white spaces that you see in the reference. Again, you can cut a regular eraser to do the same thing once we get to that. I'm going to darken this one up. Now, because I have these values pretty close to where I need them, there's still a few that need to go a little bit darker. Then I can make the changes to these values up here. And know that I'll be good. This area has quite a few. It's a very dense area. Apparently I'm not able to talk, but hey, you know. Go for it, Sergi. By all means. Darkening up some of these branches here. And then I'm going to push them back just a little bit with the eraser. If I find I need it. Darken up these branches here. It's all about building. Now, you may not have to darken yours. Just decide. I like to work in very slowly build up my light, which is funny because when In colored pencil, I don't work like this. And in watercolor, I surely don't work like this. I have found out. Like getting that color on there. And definitely don't work like this in acrylic. That is for sure. It's interesting when I think about it how different I work in the different mediums. It's just crazy. It's weird. There we go. Awesome. Wow. Well, then you need to congratulate Peter because it's very good. See, he supports your art journey as well. That's awesome. Okay, we lost quite a bit of the detail in here, but it is quite dark, so I'm going to put hints of it in here. And the interesting thing about this is your eye will fill in some of the parts that are missing. As long as you have the general appearance, your eye fills in the rest. Which I find absolutely amazing that our brain can do that. Looking to see how much more time. I only had 5 hours of record time on my camera because I have another project on there. I usually have 8.5, I think it is, normally. But I had another project on there that I did. So I want to make sure that the whole thing gets recorded. But we have plenty of time. So I think progression-wise, we will finish or get close to finishing this side. I'm not going to do the ground, but I want to get the trees done. And then we'll come back next week, next Sunday at 1, and we'll do the next step. Probably the ground on this side. Try to finish up this side and maybe start on the pathway. I'm not really sure. We'll have to see how it goes. Okay, I'm going in with my 2B because these areas down here are much darker. So I'm going to use a light pressure. Start bringing in some of the values. Again, this is my 2B. I'm not going to go all the way up. I'm going to put bits and pieces on the way up, but not straight all the way up. This will just pull it out in certain areas so it looks a little bit more foggy-esque. Foggy-esque, is that even a word? Okay, so if you look in the reference, this tree is darker than this tree. But we are going to use our 2H and we are going to lightly, notice the darkest area is on this side. So we are going to lightly put in the shadowed area here. I'm using the side of the pencil because if I go up too high like this, it's not going to blend well. And then I'm going to pull the lighter areas out after I blend with the eraser. How the foggiest. Exactly. And that is exactly what we're going for. It's not so much us creating it, so to speak. Yes, we have to create that illusion. And that's basically what we're doing, is creating the illusion of the fog. And that's by using the values of your pencil. And this piece is really going to test your value knowledge and how to get those different values to get the appearance that you want to get. So if you're struggling with values, then this is a great project to learn how to use the values to your advantage. I think when you first learn to draw or art or anything, learning value is so important. I don't care if you're working in color or black and white or whatever, those values are so important. I'm still using my 2B pencil, but I'm being very light with it to add in the branches. And then where the branches are a little bit darker, I just make sure that I go over them a couple times. To get that darker value. And then if you want some lighter branches down here, then go back in with your 2H. Or your blending stump. Your blending stump works really well too. So because of the nature of this area, I am going in with my thin blending stump because I don't want this really wide. And I'm going to blend out these thinner branches I put in. I'm going to blend my branch out. While this paper is lending itself nicely to some aspects of this artwork, there are some aspects I wish I had a smoother paper for, but all good. Yes, the paper is a little bit rough. Blending this stump out. And I'm sticking with the small blending stump on purpose, even though it's bending like crazy. Gonna put in a few of these lighter twigs. And by putting it in with the blending stump with barely any graphite on it, it gives that illusion that it's way, way, way far in the back, because there's not a lot of graphite in the front. So now I'm kind of looking at the lines that I have here that are already existing. And I'm looking like, what can I make darker? What can I make lighter? What doesn't make sense? Like if there's just like a random branch just kind of hanging out. I'm not really fond of this area right here. So I'm trying to figure out how to create a different appearance. I think I'm going to lighten it. And I'll make this branch darker here. And then, there we go. better. Little tweaks like that. If you see something you don't like, then just dab it out with your kneaded eraser and say, okay, how can I make this look a little bit better? Just little simple things like that, and tweaks that you can make to bring it more into where you want it to be. Like, I'm not really fond of this up here either. It's kind of weird. I know why, because it's too dark. So, that being said, actually, I'm going to take my Tombow mono eraser, and I'm going to actually pull some and lighten some of this up. Okay, now I'm going to take my blending stump because I don't want to go too dark. I'm only going to pull out a couple of these branches. So all those branches are still there, but now those branches look farther behind, and they don't look like they're up in front with the rest. So that looks much, much better. And that's basically what I'm going to do now with these other areas. I'm looking to see if there's any wider spots in some of these areas. If there's wider spots, then I'm going to kind of work in the negative, so to speak. And instead of creating the branches, I'm going to create some of the spots in between the branches just to separate some of that gray a little bit. And I'll give those little holes in between the and this is actually, if you use graphite powder, what many people would probably do is start out with is putting graphite powder over the entirety of this, and then use your eraser to pull out the highlights. So that is another option if we were to be able to use graphite powder. I do not, or that's not an option for us, at least me and Sergio, because we are doing this challenge. So it's not really an option for us, but that is how Sergio would probably work, is putting in the graphite powder and then pulling out the highlights. And if you find that you're a little too light with some of these, then you can go back in with your blending stump and just lightening these darker things here. Go back in with your blending stump and just tone it just a little bit. So what I mean by that is this already has graphite. If I want a little bit darker, I can put a little bit darker here, and then let's see. So let's tone this area here. So I'll just tone it just a touch. And see, it takes away that brightness of that white I just took out. So you can play this back and forth thing. if you want. You can do this back and forth thing. This is going to be, I'm going to push this back as well. Notice how bright these are, like, because this is a darker, this is where some of the darker areas got. So I'm going to push it back, but I want these separations as well. Most I would have used the powder was for the ground and maybe the foggy sides, otherwise the old-fashioned way. Gotcha. So notice as I'm pulling out these white spots, they are kind of glowing. But it does add depth. But we're going to tone those back. Kind of looking at what is already there and seeing where I can put in these white spots. Like this essentially looks like a full gray area, but I do see a couple lines, so I'm going to go ahead and separate those out. And I'm going to do some of this with a kneaded eraser, because if you don't have a Tombow mono eraser, I don't want you to feel like you have to get one. So I'm going to use this kneaded eraser, and I'm going to put it in like a little thing like this, and I can flatten it a little bit as well. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use it in some of these areas just to show you you can use whatever eraser you have. So you don't have to have that Tombow mono eraser. You can use your kneaded eraser. If you cut one of the other erasers, you can use that as well. When it gets full, just re-knead it into another little thing and then just start pulling them out again. I'm purposely doing this because I don't like it, so I'm pushing some of them back again. I'm going to use my blending stump to pull some of them back in. That's a bit better. And you can change the shape of these things. I mean, you know, you can mess with this for hours and hours upon hours. Pushing some of these back a little bit so they're not quite so bright. Hi. Studio Assistant number 1 has visited again. How are you? Okay, I think that's looking halfway decent. I'm going to take my large blending stump and just smooth this out just a little bit more without the dog hair. Now I'm going to remove some of these highlighted areas, which is part of the bark. A little bit down here. And then there's some on this side right about here. Right about here. And I'm just going to dab all the way up. And we'll go with that, I guess. Okay, I'm going to take my 8B pencil and I'm going to scribble some over here. I'm going to use my large blending stump and I'm going to pick some up. And I'm going to put some of this in here like so for the grass. Make sure this is darker than the tree. And as with the pencils, I also use varying pressures with my blending stump. So here I'm using a little bit more pressure. Back here I'm not using as much. It's very light. Just looking at the different areas, seeing where I need to make adjustments. And this kind of fades into nothing. Do I ever clean my blending stumps? Well, yes-ish. They say do not sharpen them because you get kind of these little, hold on, I have one that I sharpened. So this is one that I sharpened because I wanted to use all brand new stuff. So this is one that I sharpened, and you can see where you get these little grooves, right? And I've also used a sanding block, and I like to, I don't like the little fuzzies it gets on. I mean, they're really cheap, so you could throw them out, but I play with them and I try to get them. And then what I usually do is if I use the sanding block like this, right? So now I have all these fuzzies, which are really hard to get rid of. So what I like to do is I like to rub it on a piece of paper to get rid of those fuzzies. Right, so you can do it that way. I also have a sharpener here. So if you wanted to sharpen it, I'll do the other side. You can sharpen it. But then it gets all weird like that, so you have to end up using this anyway. So it's really up to you. If you're going to do it, I would use the block like this. I have not tried, but I have thought about getting water and putting, you know what, I have water here. Hold on. Let's do this. So I'm put water on this. Because why not? And then we'll let it dry and see what happens. I don't know how that'll work, but I would prefer just to use this and then go onto a paper with a scalpel. That's a good idea. The fuzz goes away, so it's not really that big of a deal for me. I usually just keep using the dirty one and then throw it out because they're super cheap. Schmirgelbrüchen. Nice. Okay, I want this to be darker. I'm fine with it not being completely the same value because this is the grass, so there is a lot of variation in the value anyway. This is still darker yet. Okay, so now I'm going to take my 4B. I'm going to start putting some of these grass areas in, a little bit working in the negative, but also putting some strokes in as well. And as I get closer over here, it's quite a dark area right along here and right here. Put a few in here just to get some of these darker values, but when we come back with the eraser, then it will take a lot of it away anyway. Going in with the 2B, putting in some more of these grass areas. As I go farther back, my strokes are getting shorter. Going with 2B, same thing. Pay attention to how long your grass strokes are. And kind of look at the direction they should be going. I'm not going to worry about the ones that go across just yet. We'll leave those for later. I'm going to take my blending stump and soften. Now I'm going to take my Tombow mono eraser. I'm going to start pulling out with a light pressure. If you put too hard of a pressure, you're going to take a lot of the graphite off, and you don't want a lot of the graphite off. You just want hints of this grass. So I'm using a light pressure. Again, you can use, wow, that's a really long word. I have tried water. It makes the fiber swell. The reason I ask is because what I'm using now is old kneaded eraser to push it in and twist. Gotcha. I haven't tried water, so I didn't know what it would end up doing. If it would end up drying. I mean, what side had it? So it's still drying. So I'm sure once it dries, I can put it on the sandpaper and I'll do the exact same thing. So, you can also use your kneaded eraser and pull some of these out as well. Just make sure you're going in the correct direction. If it's stopping to pull it up, it's because it has too much graphite on it. So just bend and basically it cleans it, and then you have this nice clean surface too. But the dirty is good too for when you want to not take as much off and just give a hint. So it doesn't always have to be clean, but you can kind of see where the grass is starting to take shape here. Pulling out these highlights, and I'm going to push some back with the blending stump. I'm just trying to make sure that some of these strokes are kind of, some of them are laying flat, but some of them going up. It's weird. That'd be wicked in myself, by the way, Sergio. Just saying. Or wicked in I. Going back in with my blending stump to tone some of this grass, especially the brighter areas that shouldn't be so bright. Giving it some variation. Taking my 4B, working in some of these darker areas, putting in the negative space, looking at what has already been created, trying to go in between. Looking at the reference, seeing where some of these native spaces occur. So I think I'm really going to enjoy the pathway and the guy the most. So I think I'm going to save that for last. We'll see how it goes. I kind of like doing stuff that I'm really looking forward to at the end as a reward for sticking it out through the rest. Oh, hey, Chrissy. Welcome. So I'm just softening these dark areas here. And this over here needs to be much darker. Going back in with my eraser. And again, pulling out some of these highlights. And we can go back and forth with this quite a bit, because we have the fog that we have to deal with, and then we also have the grass as well. So there's a lot of back and forth in this area, the way I do it. And I will just keep adjusting until I get it the way I want it to look. This area here still needs to be much darker, but I want to keep some of this grass texture in as I create the darkness too. Gives it a little bit more depth, and it looks like it's in layers as grass should look. Use a 2B. Putting in some of these textures even more. Chandra asked a question. I think I want to bring out this branch a little bit. I'm going to make this darker. Just using my 2B to make it darker. And this side here is darker. Now's the time I'm starting to make adjustments to the different areas. Using the lightest pressure to adjust the value on this tree, avoiding those lighter areas. I'm going to take my blending stump, but I'm going to use the other side because that one's got all the graphite on it, and I don't want to really drop much more graphite on this. Then going through here, smoothing this dark out, as well as this branch. And I'd like to create a little bit more foggy area or appearance in here, so I'm going to add a little bit more graphite there. Then I'm going to again pull out some more highlights with my eraser. I mean, we can go back and forth with this, like I said, for days, right? So, put as much detail as you want in this, or as little, just like up in the upper part. You can do as much or as little as you want. Kind of going in between. I don't want to go overboard, but I do want enough to resemble the reference. It's not looking too awful bad. Lightly tone some of these areas again. So in general, for the rest of this part, basically today's tutorial is done on this. I am just going to make a few adjustments here just to bring it more into the right values on the edge here. But if you guys have any questions, by all means, ask away. Like I said, this is about done for today. And then we'll pick up next week at 1 o'clock on Sunday the 6th. So, if you guys want to post work in progress or send me work in progress on Facebook Messenger, feel free. And then I will schedule out the next one when it gets closer to the weekend, just to make sure nothing comes up between now and then. But I am planning on next Sunday at 1. And again, put as much detail as you want. And that's about it. So I hope you guys have learned something on this tutorial so far. I'm really liking the way this is looking. It's very misty type of thing going on. Not sure if I'll work on that side or if I'll just go ahead and continue on. I might just continue on this way. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments afterwards or message me. And thank you all for joining. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a great week. And for those of you that can join in on Chrissy's stream, Chrissy will be streaming on Wednesday as it stands right now, providing nothing happens between now and then. And I will see you guys. Thank you so much, Wicked. And I will see you guys next weekend. Probably be, I don't even know what I'm saying. I don't even know what I'm saying. So I will see you guys next week. And thank you so much for joining. And thanks for all the compliments. And hopefully nothing major happens this week, guys. So I will see you later. Bye, guys.